Bob Boylan, he's such a legend, such an amazing supporter of music, and just to provide that platform for musicians to like come in and really show you what their songs are about. That's what you really see, like one person in a piano or everyone stripping down their instruments to like showcase the beauty of the music.
Well, I'm Adam. I appreciate you doing this again. Thank you so much.
Of course, of course.
This is a podcast about you in your journey in music, and we'll talk about the record you have coming out in April, and the newest song, which I love, is great. How Sweet Is Your Love, and even Everything Is Everything that you put out before that. So I'm excited to kind of hear
Thank
your
you
story.
very much. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So, were you born in London? Is that what I saw?
Yep.
Okay. How long did you live there? And tell me about that.
My father was a diplomat, Sudanese diplomat. So we lived in London in the UK.
Mhm.
They lived in the UK for a little bit of time while he was working at the Sudanese embassy, and I was born in 1983, and they headed back to Sudan, I think maybe a year later. And before my family emigrated to the United States in 1989, we would spend summer holidays and like any kind of holidays in London. So as a kid, I remember going back quite a bit. But I wouldn't really call London or the UK home at all. I didn't really stay uh there at a time where I was like really cognizant of it being like my home. It was just kind of this place that I was born, and then we'd come back and go to Regent's Park and hang out and do that kind of thing. But when I go back now as an adult, it definitely feels like a part of who I am.
Yeah, you said Sudan. Were you going? Did you move there as well early?
Yeah, so my family's from Sudan. So I was born in London, and
Huh.
my father went back and was working for the Sudanese government in Sudan. And all of I mean, none of my family really is there now because of the war and just kind of the terrible
Sure.
situation happening right now. They've all had to flee, but uh, we lived there until 1989. There was a military coup that overthrew the government. My father was affiliated with that government, so
Oh man.
yeah, we happened to be in Boston, Massachusetts, of all places. My dad was studying at Boston University at the time while he was still affiliated with the Sudanese government. And we applied for asylum and emigrated to the United States and spent, I think, starting from summer before seventh grade or eighth grade, I think, every summer in Sudan until I was about 24. So,
Wow.
yeah, so it was kind
So
of
you were going back and forth even though all that stuff was happening there?
a little bit. There was a few years where we didn't go back at all. But I remember maybe a year after we moved to Utah, we'd go back um and then a couple years we did it, and then we started just going back every single summer, and it was really stressful, to be honest, just getting into the country, having a father who was affiliated with a government that was overthrown, and you know
Mhm.
having people kind of sneak us through customs so they didn't realize that we were affiliated with my dad. And a lot of Sudanese kids, expats, third culture kids like me have dealt with the same similar story, figuring out how to get into the country and see their family without letting people know that their family was affiliated with the democracy. So,
Oh my
um,
gosh, that must have been so scary, right? I mean, you're like, what if somebody knows we get in, we're with our family, and then what if, somebody rats us? I don't know. That would be,
yeah.
I think,
Well,
stressful.
I think it was, I think it was a lot more romantic to
Oh,
me as a
interesting.
kid than it was scary. And as an adult now, I realize we would have been fine. We would have been totally fine. Like you're kind of like a needle in a haystack. Sudan is a very big country. There's a lot of people there, and like randomly plucking out my family out of obscurity to like, you know, to do something would have been pretty insane to
Yeah.
for us to be those people. And then, halfway through that process of doing all that stuff, my family gained citizenship in the United States. So that became just really easy to come in and out as a US citizen. But prior we just held residency, and we only had Sudanese passports and US residency. So that's the only stressful part about it. It became a little
More
uh,
difficult.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was difficult in that place. But as like a 10 to 17-year-old kid, being able to say to your friends like, "Oh yeah, my family snuck into Sudan." Like I had
That's pretty cool.
that was really fun to to give them that anecdote.
Sure. You said your dad was studying at in Boston, and
Mhm.
was your whole family in Boston while he was studying there, or was he just abroad and you were still in Sudan when that was happening?
We were all there with him.
Okay.
He came a little earlier, and like maybe like 6 months prior to when we came. I mean, very vividly remember coming into the airport, him picking us up, and every day living in this like really tiny apartment near Boston University, near the giant Citgo sign, and walking to McDonald's for dinner sometimes, and trying 7 Up for the first time, like really experiencing American culture. It was a lot of fun as a kid.
Sure. And you were in Boston. You said you were in Utah as well.
Mhm.
I did read. I mean, Wikipedia slapped me in the face hundreds of times. But it mentioned Ohio. That my family's originally from Ohio. I wasn't born there. I
Mm.
like was My mom was 9 months pregnant with me when my family moved to San Diego.
Oh,
So I
okay.
missed it by like this much. But did you spend some time in Ohio as well?
Yeah, yeah. Ohio was like my formative years. I moved there when I was 13.
Okay.
So we moved to Kent, Ohio. That's where my
Oh, really? My cousin went to Kent State.
Yeah, yeah. So the timeline is like this. We lived in Boston. My dad graduated from school. He we weren't able to go back to Sudan, so we had to figure out what to do with our family. And
Mhm.
he had a friend of his who said, "Why don't you come to Utah and I'll get you into the university here." And so he decided to do his PhD at Brigham Young University, of all places
Wow.
in the entire world, for a Sudanese Muslim family to go to.
A
So
Mormon school.
yeah, exactly. So he went
Interesting.
back to school. My mom got her master's there, and
Wow.
uh, then he got a job in Northeast Ohio teaching at a college, and we moved to Kent. I was 13. And yeah, that's where I would say I really grew up
Okay.
in Kent. I went to high school there, and I went to Ohio State for university.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah.
That's awesome. My uncle went to Ohio State as well, and I went to a football game there one time with him. It was the
Oh yeah.
most insane experience I've ever had in my life. It was
Yep.
so
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah. In Kent or in Columbus, we called there's like the street called High Street where everything is
Yeah,
right
yeah.
right next to campus, and the numbered streets there, like from like the 13th to like maybe Ninth Street, they call the tear gas district, because that's where all like the frat houses and the
Oh,
party houses,
sure.
like the animal houses are. And my freshman year, Ohio State beat Miami for the national championship. And after the Michigan game,
Was that '02? Or
yeah,
no, that would have been late. Was that '02?
yeah.
Oh, wow.
And after the Michigan game, the parties were so intense that there were celebratory riots all up and down High Street, and like people throwing burned couches onto the street and flipping cars
Oh
and
my
stuff like
God.
that, looting stuff. And we'd come back from Christmas break, and there'd be cops coming into like our dorms and knocking on these kids' dorm rooms and having pictures and be like, "Is this you? Is this you flipping this car?" And they'd expel them right away. That happened like to 3 kids on my floor.
Oh, wow. That's insane. Yeah, I
Yeah.
went to one game there, and there's like that varsity. I think it's called the Varsity Club
Yep.
or
Yeah. The
Varsity
varsity club.
Bar.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, I remember like I'd never been to I went to a bunch of Browns games growing up because we'd come back every year to visit my dad's family, and you'd go to those. I went to that one Ohio State game. There's no one. There's 120,000 people, or so the and stadium is crazy.
Yep.
Not one person in the whole thing was wearing the other team's jersey, which I'd never seen.
Hmm.
And then you go to that varsity club and it's just like everything's in a can. So people are just throwing the cans on the ground. It was so crazy. I'm like, this is the
Yeah.
most wild experience.
It was wild. It was scary, like the at times, especially
Yeah.
after the Michigan games. Nothing was as like intense as my freshman year, but maybe that's just because you just kind of get desensitized to how intense like the tailgating is. I remember
Oh
driving to
man.
work, and driving down a street that usually takes me 10 minutes to drive to get to work. It took me an hour on a game day one day, you
Jeez.
know,
Yeah, that
pretty
is
wild.
so crazy.
Yeah.
Well, to back up a little bit here, because I'm curious about you having two parents that have, advanced degrees, but how did you get into music?
You know, it was always in me, but a lot of my extended family, like my grandparents on both of my uh, parents' side, were pretty creative and musical. My grandfather on my mom's side, my her father was a pretty well respected like Muslim cleric in Sudan. He has a mosque named after him and was was known as Al Khalifa, which is like kind of like a very regal term for a high standing like Sufi Muslim. He's a Sufi. And he, you know, after the sixth grade, he just committed himself to Islam and went to a madrasa and like studied under these mentors, you know, and just kind of became this very well-known person in the community. And he in Sufi culture, in specifically African Sufi culture, you have these things called the al-Mawlid, which is a celebration of the birth of the Prophet Muhammad. And your sect, your Sufi sect, get together and you do this really beautiful and wonderful celebration where there's um there's a lot of pomp and circumstance, you know, like these young kids enter the congregation with drums and people kind of stand facing each other, nodding back and forth and doing this call and response prayer kind of thing.
Mhm.
And then my grandfather and two or three other high-standing Sufis would recite these religious stories in song, essentially in song. You know,
Wow.
you wouldn't call it song as a Muslim because it's not, you're not singing, you know, but it sounds like that. Um and as a kid, I remember being at these molids and just being so captivated by his voice and how he was reciting these really beautiful stories. I mean, the Quran is written in poetry, so it's like just really flowery and beautiful words of it kind of explaining things. And he just had this really wonderful voice. And I would have these like tantric kind of out of body experiences watching and listening to these recitations. Um, and sometimes just thought I was seeing stuff, you know. And
Mhm.
that was like my first real entrance into understanding music, really, you know, as like a 3 to 6 year old kid listening and hearing my grandfather do this kind of stuff. And it passed down to my mom. My mom sings a lot. She played guitar. My grandmother on my dad's side was a poet. And a lot of my family sings a lot. So it was kind of in, you know, genetically inherited, you
Mhm.
know, in that way, but no one really ever did anything with it in the same way that I did. I think I was the one person who just could, you know, who just went for it. And I remember, you know, being 11 years old and going to a music store and sitting down on the drums and thinking, this is what I want to do. This is my purpose. You know, I played my first show a year later and
Wow.
really
As a
didn't,
drummer, that's where you
yeah,
started? Okay.
yeah, and just never really looked back and became so incredibly obsessed with music and understanding music and seeing all of my, you know, all of my favorite bands growing up. I mean, every weekend I was in Cleveland seeing a concert throughout high school until I graduated high school. Literally every single weekend. And,
Wow.
you know, it was my escape from everything. And I recently went back to music school and got a master's in composition. And
No way.
yeah, and it's I'm one of those guys. I'm really, really obsessed with all of that kind of stuff. And I just can't really stop thinking about it.
That's incredible. And with, like, what bands were you going to see in Cleveland? Like, what were you listening to at the time?
I was such an indie rock dork. I think,
Oh, really?
yeah, I mean, I mean, I probably saw every single indie rock band that toured through Cleveland between 1998 and 2004
Wow.
until I
Yeah,
moved to
we're the
Columbus.
same age. I was just going off of what you just said as far as when you were born. So, like,
Yeah,
I'm sure the same bands came through San Diego, and that's where
I
I was into as well, like indie bands and stuff.
and there was a really big punk and hardcore scene in Ohio, and
Mhm.
I was a part of that. So a lot of like in Kent, there was this really amazing label called Donut Friends Records that uh was run by this guy named Jamie Stillman, who was in a band called the Party Helicopters and Harriet the Spy, and those were our bands. That was like
Okay.
the first time I ever got to see a person that released music as close to me as, my friends playing music that just blew my mind. And it was like, oh, I can do this. This guy's
Mhm.
showing me that I can do this. And he would bring so many different bands through. Um, and that was really great on that kind of level. And then I was a really, really big fan of Death Cab for Cutie and
Mhm.
Radiohead and uh Spiritualized and like, that kind of stuff back in Kent, back when I was like a teenager. So
Uh-huh.
any opportunity to go to the Beachland Ballroom or Grog Shop or Speak in Tongues back in the day, you know, like
Mhm.
all of those places I was seeing any band.
Wow. And you said were in a band like pretty quickly after you said within what, a year of learning drums? Were like what style of music were you all playing?
That was in Utah, so it was
Oh, wow, that was even before you got to Cleveland
yeah, that was
or Kent.
yeah, I think the show was oh, I think my in the beginning of seventh grade or something. And that band was I remember what our guitar player was obsessed with Pearl Jam and like it was like MTV from 1996 like with Red Hot
Uh,
Chili Peppers and Oasis. I think Oasis
yeah.
was my first favorite band of all time.
I love Oasis. Like,
Yeah.
oh, Smashing Pumpkin. I remember waiting for like 1979 video to come on and like sitting for 3 hours, and sometimes you wouldn't even see it. I was like, damn. Was I in the
Smashing
bathroom at the
Pumpkins.
time?
That was my first show that I ever went to.
Really?
My first concert
Wow.
with Smashing Pumpkins at the Delta Center in um in Salt Lake City. And so it was a lot of that, like, alternative, it's a first band kind of thing. We did a lot of
Mhm.
covers. We covered like Green Day and Red Hot Chili Peppers and stuff like that. But when I moved to Kent, that was the first time I really was in a band that I was like, all right, this is our identity, and
Mhm.
it was very much influenced by indie rock, like specifically like Hum
Oh, I
and
love
like
Hum, man.
yeah,
Stars, what a great
oh
song.
yeah, yeah. It's Godspeed, Black Emperor, and like
Oh,
Death Cab from that era way back in the day, and Sigur Rós, Radiohead, like
sure.
all that kind of like indie rock with lots of sparkly sounds.
Sure. And how long did you do that band? Like, eventually, I mean, you go to Ohio State, which Columbus is a couple hours at least probably away from Kent.
Yeah.
Um, so did you like when you ended up going to Ohio State, were you pursuing music still? Or I
Oh
mean,
yeah, yeah.
having two parents and with advanced degrees, were they like supportive of the music thing you were trying to pursue?
They weren't until they were.
Okay.
But when I moved to Columbus, yeah, you know what it is like. So people that come from my situation, like specifically East African. I mean, a lot of people who are come from expat families, but I can only speak for East African. Although I've related to a lot of kids who are not East African but grew up, in America, but not being from America.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pressure because I'll speak for myself. My parents were like, we brought you to this country to give you a lot of opportunity, and you could literally get a degree and become a lawyer and make more money than we could have ever imagined,
Right.
which is fair. That's totally fair. So being competitive, I was like, well, I'll show you what kind of opportunity exists here, and I'm going to do music, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing as you said, but it's going to be through music because you can't really do it in the same way in Sudan. So but they also thought like, okay, this is a fad. He's gonna outgrow this. He's gonna go to college and like, get a degree and get
Yeah. Get
married
it
and
9 to 5 and do the
yeah.
deal.
And I went to college and I connected with some friends who were also from Kent, and I joined the first serious band I was ever in. Who we actually released our like long lost album yesterday, 20 almost 25 years.
Did
Uh,
you really? Oh,
yeah.
wow. I didn't even realize that. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
our friend Justin with his label called Expert Works, he released the records, and it was the
What's the
first
band called?
called Sweetheart.
Sweetheart. Okay, cool. I have
Yeah,
to check that out.
and so yeah, so I joined Sweetheart. We became a thing. It was this hardcore band. It was a very amazing, cathartic, and wonderful time in my life, in all of our lives, and it was the first time I went on tour. Brian Parker, guitar player, he taught me literally everything. He taught me how to tour, how to book a tour, how to, be a part of a bigger musical community like in Columbus, because he was a pretty upstanding person in the musical community there. He taught me how to just be in a band, and for 4 years we toured every time, every moment that we didn't have school, we were on tour.
Oh,
Weekends, holiday breaks, made a lot of friends along the way, and brought a lot of bands to Columbus as well. And th that really solidified, what I wanted to do with my life. The moment we started going on tour, I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. And after that band disbanded is when I started SInkane.
okay. Okay. And I've just based again off of the research I've done on you. I mean, you've worked with a ton of artists. You were like what session musician for a
Yeah.
bunch of, I mean, Yes there and a bunch of bands. Like, was that all just based off, like, I mean, doing your own thing with Sinkane? Were you also working along with other people? Like, was it just connections you made, or like, how did this project kind of coincide with everything else that looks like you've done in your career?
Sure, yeah. So at every single show that I went to, starting from maybe when I was 14,
Mhm.
I always brought a demo of my band's music with me, and I wouldn't leave.
Smart.
Yeah, I wouldn't leave the show until I gave it to, one of the bandmates in the band that I loved. Like my favorite band, I think probably around that time was Sunny Day Real Estate, and
Oh, man, Diary, what a that's
yeah,
still one of the
and
best albums ever written.
I remember like making my friend Sammer wait as long as possible until Jeremy Enick and Dan Horner walked off stage, or walked from backstage to come sign my set list, give him a record, like just
Wow.
that's what I would do. I was relentless. And in 2007, I went and saw Caribou play, who was at that time that was my favorite band. And I did the same thing. I went straight to Dan after the show and I gave him my SInkane record. It was like a CDR. I still hadn't even released it properly or found the label or anything. And I spilled my guts to him and told him how much I loved his music and how important it was for me to like start my project. And he was so nice, and responded to me a couple months later saying he liked it. And um, from that moment, he was like, "Let me know, if you ever want to come see us play." And I asked him if we could support them for a show in Columbus, and he said yes. And so I just like quit my job and got my band on tour, and I was like, "We're gonna get ready. We're gonna have this really amazing. This is my moment," kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean,
It
to
did
get that validation from the band that you love, your favorite band, I mean, that's so, like, rare, right?
that. I mean, it was crazy, and the tour didn't go well. I had to go back home after a day because the van died and blew up, and so I didn't have a job, and I was a week away from the show, and I was trying to figure out what to do. And I went I went I woke up one morning going to a job interview, and before the job interview I checked my email, and there was an email from Dan, and he said their drummer broke his wrist and they needed a replacement, and they were looking for people. And I wrote him back and I said I'll do it. And as I'm driving to the job interview, he called me and he said, "Hey, we need you in North Carolina tonight. It would be great to have you join us." And that happened, and I had to put SInkane on the back burner. Um, I thought for maybe like a couple months, and it ended up being like 4 years. And in that opportunity, like opened me up to playing with every single band that I played with. I played with. It was April 1st, 2008 in North Carolina. The next day we played in Athens, Georgia, and I met of Montreal there. They asked me to join the band. So
Wow.
I, and then like a few months later, or a few weeks later, Caribou, we toured with this band, Born Ruffians.
Uh-huh.
I met them there. And so after the of Montreal gig finished, Born Ruffians asked me to play for them. And so I went on tour with them. And by then I had lived in New York. Um, Actually, no, sorry. On the tour with Born Ruffians, I met Yeser at all these old festivals called All Tomorrow's Parties. They did this like Pitchfork curated one.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, a lot of those bands that are all like kind of that in that pitchfork scene,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Yeasayer was at that, Dirty Projectors, all these people that I ended up becoming friends with afterwards. And Yeasayer were there, and Anand and Ira, I ended up hanging out with them all night at that show. And when I moved to New York, they were like, "Hey, we'd love to play with you." And I was on tour with Born Ruffians, and that tour ended, and I played with Yeasayer for the next 3 years of my life. And after that happened, after those like, from one band to another, there was a kind of a fork in the road where it was it was either I was gonna be a sideman forever,
Hmm.
or I was gonna actually start pursuing SInkane again. And um, Dan was generous enough to pass my record to City Slang Records, that releases his music in Europe, and they liked it and they wanted to work with me, and so I decided to pursue SInkane at that point.
Wow. And was it, I mean, playing as a drummer, it sounds like you drummed for all of these bands, right? I mean, Syncane was not only a totally different sound than what those bands sounds like, at least with the newest stuff I'm hearing from you.
Mhm.
Was it, I mean, writing your own songs and do you play everything on the Syncane things as far as like vocals, all that stuff? And was that different to kind of take that role as opposed to being kind of the drummer throughout like a lot of those bands?
Well, I would say Yeasayer was kind of the bridge because
Okay.
I didn't really play drums in Yeasayer. I played keys and a little
Oh,
guitar.
okay.
Um, I was gonna play drums, but then this guy Jason Trammell came through, and his audition just he he got the gig as a drummer, and they told me they wanted me to try to do something else. And Jason, is a really dear friend of mine, and he played in Syncane for a very long time as well. So we became really great friends through that. Um, but yeah, I barely played. I didn't even sit down on a drum kit with Yeasayer, and
Okay.
that made the transition to Syncane pretty easy. But prior to any of those bands, when I was doing Syncane shows, in like 2004, 2000, or sorry, 2005, 2006, um, it was either just me on a guitar or me leading a band playing guitar.
Okay. So you kind of, yeah, had your feet wet. At least it wasn't like, okay, I'm gonna go from drumming to now I'm the center focus of this project that I have going on.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's one thing playing guitar in a band in a basement, to your friends or to like maybe 30 people or something. But when you know, get into like actually doing it, all over the
Mhm.
world, you get thrown into
Yeah.
these situations all over the world. It gets getting used to. Some people really thrive in that situation. I did as a drummer and I did as like a session guy, but it took me a second to understand what it meant to be like a front person.
Hmm. And at what point, like, what was kind of, was there an early like milestone that you had hit when you're like, wow, okay, this is really working out for me. I'm doing,
As a
or was
frontman,
there, I'm sorry.
as a frontman,
Yeah. Yeah. With Sinkane.
I think it took the second album on DFA and City Slang Me and Love.
Okay.
That halfway through that tour, something clicked. I think we toured a lot during that album, and also I MD'd the Atomic Bomb Band, which is the band that
Yeah.
was a tribute to William Onyeabor. So that was a really intense undertaking, having to wrangle that many musicians. And
That many stars, right? I mean,
yeah,
having Damon Albarn around and
yeah,
David Byrne. I mean, yeah, the guy from Hot Chip. There's just like I'm looking at the Beastie Boys. I mean, you look at the people that were in that. It's like
it was a lot,
wild.
and it was a lot of fun, but it was a big job. And playing those shows to that many people, like our first show was a sold out show at the Barbican in the UK. That's a pretty big deal. And like being in front of that kind of energy,
Mhm.
um, leading music that sounds like that, it's it's like energetic. You just can't really not get up and move and like, get outside of yourself in that way. Like if you have any jitters or any weirdness, and you get presented a situation like that and thrown into a situation like that, all you know, they that just goes out the window. At least for me, it did.
Hmm.
And doubling up on SInkane tours and Atomic Bomb tours, and sometimes playing two sets at the same festival, one with SInkane and one with Atomic Bomb, it really just kind of threw me into just, okay, this is what I got to do. It's fight or flight. Let's go, you know. And we did this tour with Hot Chip at the time, and I remember walking into that tour and just like getting on stage for the first show and just all of a sudden something clicked. It flipped. It became easier, it became really natural. Like the synergy between all of us on stage was really great and just connected. It was pretty great.
Yeah. And then you ended up with it was a couple few albums later with Life and Living. I mean, that one took you like national television. I mean, you got on
Mm.
Conan and all that. That was that. I mean, that must have been a pretty huge moment as well. Like, okay, this record's doing awesome as well. Um, Now I'm getting television appearances. Like, at what point are your parents like, okay, we're, we see this happening? Was it now he's on TV or is it before that?
It was the first time I was on TV. So in 2000 and what was it? 2008 is right when I'm actually this was the reason why I moved to New York. I was
Okay.
playing with Montreal and we got the Letterman gig.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was on December 9th or December 19th, 2008. And up to that point, my mom still on the phone was like, "What are you doing? What are you doing with your life? Like, I don't care that you're making money. You know, this is weird." And I won't get into the details, but
Yeah,
it was
parents don't
gigantic.
understand. My parents still don't understand what I do, and I was, like,
Yeah,
on terrestrial radio for over a decade, but it doesn't matter.
exactly. And I remember being on the phone with her, and she was asking me like, "What's going on?" And I'm like, "Oh, well, I'm finishing up this tour. We're playing on David Letterman," and she just got silent and was like, "Really? Really?" And that was it. After that, she started bragging about me all of a sudden,
Oh,
like,
sure, calling all her
oh,
friends, like, "My son's gonna be on Letterman tonight, make sure you check it out."
yeah, it was awesome. I mean, like, come on, I got to meet Will Smith that day. It was great.
Damn. Yeah, and then you did it with your own band, right? I mean, your own project with Conan. I mean, that's so wild.
Conan was great, but I'll say this: we did Tiny Desk, and that was very
Oh, yeah.
special.
Oh
That
my
was like
gosh.
that was like just a wonderful experience to be able to you know re redo your songs for that space. And it's like there's no like magic or secret or like you know special thing that you like on TV. You play on TV, and afterwards you go back to the production people, and they can like change things to make it sound perfect.
Oh, okay.
On Tiny Desk, it's just like you're like free balling.
It's just live, right? You do, like, 5 songs?
Yeah, you do like three to five songs.
Yeah.
There's no amps. You're completely like naked in front of everyone doing what you do. That you can't tune your vocals. You can't like do any of that kind of stuff. So I think that's why like things like T-Pain's uh, Tiny Desk is so like wonderful because you're really seeing him for who he is, and he like everyone thought he was just like this auto-tune guy, but he has a great voice, and it's just him and a piano, and that's it.
Yeah,
And
I just had this conversation with somebody recently, actually. They're, like, using Autotune on their new record, like, a little bit. I can't remember who it was, but I was like, Autotune works if you can like, if people know you can actually sing, and I used the example of T-Pain because people just assume that he has that one sound with the Autotune, but the guy is insanely good at singing.
oh my goodness, I mean his Black Sabbath cover is insane.
Yeah, it's
You know,
crazy. You hear
I
him on
think
certain records and you're like, "Okay, he's got this Autotune thing," and then you hear it without the Autotune, it's like, "Damn, this guy."
it's insane. Yeah, and I don't know Bob Boylan. He's such a legend. Such an amazing supporter of music, and just to provide that platform for musicians to like come in and really show you what their songs are about. That's what you really see. Like one person in a piano or everyone stripping down their instruments to like showcase the beauty of the music, and that was really really special.
Amazing. Well, I want to talk to you about the new album you have coming out, and I've heard a couple of the songs from the record. Everything is everything, and then How Sweet Is Your Love. When did you start working on this? And kind of tell me about the story behind the album.
Sure, yeah, I started working on it. I think it was right before the pandemic. I think it
Oh,
was
okay.
November of 2019 was when I first started really writing. I came back from the last SInkane tour for the album Dépaysé, and it was a pretty depressing. That whole album cycle was not fun. No one in the band was getting along, and it was nobody's fault really. It's just everyone was miserable. The album didn't really do as well as the previous one, and um, by uh, by all, I don't know. It just didn't. It was different, and
Hmm.
I came back home and I decided to just kind of throw myself into writing music again to see if that would make me feel better about stuff. And it did for a while. And then the pandemic hit, and that was amazing for me. And my wife as well. We really slowed down. I took a lot of time off. And I decided I wanted to go to music school. I knew I wasn't going to be touring for a while, and I applied for this program at SUNY Purchase here in New York, and I got it in and spent 2 years really just wonderful 2 years of like relearning my relationship with music, understanding the science of music, taking as many classes as I possibly could, just really going in. And one of the amazing things about that program is once a week you meet with your private study advisor and you talk about what you want to, what you want your your junior and your senior projects to be. And you have to kind of create music for that. And so I would bring in my favorite music to analyze, and then we would create these like um assignments to use the tools that these musicians and were using, or kind of break down the theory of what they were doing, and then kind of give me homework to like apply that to something new that I was working on, and that's pretty much how the record started getting like some sort of steam.
Oh,
And I,
interesting. So it's totally a different approach for this. I mean, to
oh,
go in and
completely.
bring your influences or the songs you like and really break them down and be able to utilize some of that,
Yeah,
apply some of that to your own songs. I mean, I'm sure that
exactly.
changed the sound quite a bit or changed your perspective on it.
Yeah, it was so inspiring, I bring like Herbie Hancock tunes or David Bowie tunes,
Mhm.
and Gilberto Gil was a really big one for me too, and really understand what they were doing with their music, and it made me feel so much more connected to music because it was no longer this like, oh my goodness, this is all this so magical. I don't understand. I can't even begin to fathom
Mhm.
how these people are doing it. It turned into like, oh, they're speaking a language, and now I'm learning this language, and now I can communicate with them directly or indirectly, consciously, subconsciously, because I understand what what they're saying, literally what they're saying musically. Um, and so every week this would happen for 2 years. And it really got me really into the process of writing the songs and understanding how I could get these ideas that I've always had in my head uh into song form, finally in a way that like made sense for me. And then I think it was maybe the the last semester of school where it really kicked into high gear. I was starting to send out my demos to my friends that I usually work with, my collaborators, Greg LaFaro, who I've worked with for a long time, and Amanda Kiri, who um, was in the band for a while. And we kind of had this weird falling out, but, rekindled our friendship. And, through working on this album, honestly became even closer friends, which is great. I'd send her these songs and ask her what she thought about them, and she would have an opinion, and it just kind of turned into this like really natural routine of just working together, and she's an amazing lyricist. I always like working with other lyricists on my music, and I would send her a song by dinner time and wake up the next morning and she had a lot of ideas for me, and I would implement them, and then we'd start talking to each other back and forth, and you know um uh, create what the song was about, what we were trying to say. Same thing with Asia Grant, Casey Benjamin, Money Mark from the BC Boys, who I worked with on Ybor. I would just send them this music and be like, "Do you have an opinion on this?" And Money Mark in particular, I would say, "What did you guys use to record the synthesizer in this Beck tune?" Or like, "What did the BC Boys use to like get this sound?" And he's just like an encyclopedia for gear and production techniques, and
Yeah.
he would always have something to say. And one time he was in town, and I was like, "Come to the studio, let's jam," and we did. And I was like, "This is really fun. Let's continue doing this. I'm gonna send you all my music. You can help me produce this record." And it just was super organic in that way, and it really moved the needle forward. And
Wow.
then I think the final piece was I put together a new band,
Oh,
and
in the studio or with just as like a touring, like on stage live set?
as a touring band, because we needed to make up some COVID dates, and I like the old band just did it just ended.
It seemed
um
like you had stuff going on before, before COVID
yeah,
or
and
whatever.
I'm very grateful for everything that I did with everyone in the past, and a lot of those guys now are doing some really amazing stuff, and I'm really 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 happy and proud of our musical relationships, and it's all great. But I saw this band called Holy Hand Grenade in New York, who are now called Tiger Tiger, and they were
Oh, I
playing
know
a
who
show.
Tiger. Wow.
Yeah, they were playing a show and just covering these like Mulatto Estatica and Herbie Hancock songs, and it's like, wow, this is insane. This is really really good, like Fela tunes, and it sounded modern but not really, and it just in this way that I kind of approach music and want to hear music. And I just walked up to him and I was like, "You guys want to play with me? You want to be my band?" And they took it on, and we started playing together, and it was like instant connection, especially with Dave Palazzola and Ronnie Lanzalotta, the bassist and drummer. We just really connected right away. And I had them once we went to the studio. I brought them into the studio. They play on every single song. And I needed some singers for the live band, and that's how I met through Eli Paperboy Reed. I met Ifedayo, and Ifedayo, they suggested to bring a friend of theirs, Jessica Harp, and started playing with the two of them live, and brought them into the studio, and they're doing all of the background singing in the studio. Um, and through just some other people, I met Stout and True Osborne. uh, Casey Benjamin has been a person that I've worked with for a long time, and just kind of brought him along, and he brought a bunch of his buddies too. So it was this really wonderful like snowball effect of like, let me reach out to this person and add on to this person, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, this is like a community of musicians that are in the studio with me. It's really wonderful.
That is so amazing. You mentioned, I just want to back up for a half a second here. You mentioned, bringing songs in or artists in to this, one-on-one thing that you had for your class or for your education. Would you bring in a new band or a new song every single week and kind of pick from those, or was it like, okay, today I'm gonna bring in Bowie and you kind of break down a handful of Bowie songs, or like how did that work?
So the Bowie one is a good example actually, because that was the first big one for me. I brought in Ashes to Ashes by David Bowie, and I love that song. If you're like a non-musical person, if you don't know much about theory or anything, that song just sounds like magic. There's like all of these
Yeah,
twists and turns and weird stuff, and like it starts in one place and ends in a completely different place. And I wanted to analyze the song. Like a lot of my other classes that I was taking was musical analysis, like analyzing Bach chorales or Chopin or something like that. So we applied the same techniques of analyzing the music to like old classical Bach chorales to a David Bowie tune, and tried to understand what kind of musical theory tools he was implementing to create this music. And so we came up with we came up with understanding one in particular that was really cool. And so my advisor was like, all right, so let's make a formula of this tool that he's using, of this like musical phrase, so that it's like you're really just extracting the DNA of the song and creating a formula of it. And then now you implement this formula into a song, you know?
Hmm.
And that was really fun. That was really like that's the way my brain works. It's so cerebral. Um, and you understand that like these things that some people might call just like soul or magic. It's really not. Like it's these people actually thought very thoughtfully about how to make this sound this way. Um, and so that technique I utilized on a song that actually isn't on the album. It's called Say Less. It's a outtake, you know. And I did the same thing with the song Rise Above, the whole second section, the back end of it. That sounds like a like weird Herbie Hancock tune. I analyzed a bunch of Herbie songs, you know, and understood what kind of musical movements he was doing and to make it sound the way that he was using, what kind of extensions he was using, all of that kind of stuff to like to kind of create this song that kind of sounds like a 1970s Quiet Storm Herbie Hancock spiritual jazz thing, you know. Um, and it was great, you know. It was so much fun. It's like, oh wow, this is how this sounds when I use these tools, you know.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, and it was wild to think. I was just thinking about this right now. Is like, a artist like David Bowie, you sometimes they don't get enough credit. It's just like, oh, this guy's a genius, and he goes in and just thinks of these lyrics and this melody and puts this song down. But like, if you really break down what they are doing, it's just, I'm sure it's got to be like, oh my
It,
gosh, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's more than some lyrics and a melody and a guitar.
I'll give you another example. The song "We Belong" is pretty inspired, heavily inspired by D'Angelo and also Justin Timberlake's song "Senorita."
Okay.
And analyzing Senorita was really interesting for me because essentially that Rhodes part that like runs through the verses and the
Mhm.
chorus is is this incredibly dissonant musical cluster. It's just like notes that if you play them next to each other on their own are shrill to your ears. They don't make sense at all. But the way that they're laid out and the way that they're performed, it sounds very musical, you know?
Mhm.
So understanding what those intervals were between the notes and how they were collected and and performed, you know, to make it sound musical was really interesting for me. And D'Angelo does a lot of that with his take on jazz, and jazz is all about dissonance, you know, and
Yeah.
making things that seemingly don't, you know, it's very intellectual and very like you know, cerebral in the way that it works. And you realize that all of these things work together and they kind of resolve into each other in this interesting way once you know musical theory. It all just kind of resolves into something that allows your brain to understand it as like either interesting or as home, you know.
Right.
Um, and in understanding all of that, I was able to write that song, you know.
Wow.
Um, and if you go back and listen to Senorita and you go back and listen to like Voodoo, you'll be like, oh, okay, I can kind of see like where he was coming from. It's a bit of a simplified version of what they were doing, but
Mhm.
especially Senorita, that's just like a bizarre,
I have to
bizarre.
go listen to that now because you just hear it as like a pop song, right? You don't really think about the how,
Yeah,
good it
the
is when you break it down.
that Rhodes part is just it's pretty intense. I mean, you if you isolated it, you listen to it, you're like, wow, these are like these notes. It just sounds like someone's like bashing on a piano, like a cat walking through a
Just
piano.
ding. Oh, that's so funny. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I like I said, the songs you have out thus far for this record are awesome. The whole album comes out in April, I believe, April 5th.
Yep.
And then you're doing a bunch of shows around what, May, right after the album comes out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going on a solo tour actually right after the album or before the album comes out, right after South by Southwest. We're gonna do South by Southwest and then we're gonna go I'm gonna go on my own and just kind of do a solo tour with Black Violin, which I'm pretty excited about.
Oh, cool.
I,
What when
yeah.
when does that start? I don't know if I saw those dates. I just saw the ones like a ballroom and you're playing Independent San Francisco and
Yep, yeah, that's later. The Black Violin tour starts let me see here. Starts on the 18th, March 18th. Or March 19th, sorry. March 19th.
rad.
And then our album release show is May 3rd at Bowery Ballroom. and that's with the band. Everything else beyond that will be with the band. We go to
Okay.
Europe for a second, the UK, and then we do a US tour that starts around Memorial Day.
Awesome. Are you playing Nashville in that first leg?
No, not Nashville, not yet. Yeah, that'll
Uh,
probably be in the fall.
cool. Well, that's where I'm at now, so I want to come check you
You live
out.
there?
Yeah. So
Well, I was just there.
really?
Yeah, I was just there because I'm working producing these two gospel records for Luwakabop, and we did some work. My friend who actually recorded Mean Love, he lives there, and I was working with him. And my sister-in-law actually used to live there and work at Locust, so we'd come down and eat at Locust.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah,
Right
I love
on.
that place.
Well, that is so cool, dude. Well, I appreciate you doing this. Thanks for rescheduling. This is so fun to chat with you. I can't wait for the record to come out. And I have one more question for you. I
Sure.
want to know if you have any advice for aspiring artists.
Any advice for aspiring artists?
Yes.
If this is what you want to do, put 900% of your time and effort into doing it. There is a space for you in the wide spectrum of music, and there is someone out there, a few people out there, maybe more than a few people out there who need to hear what you are doing. Your voice is important, and you should completely go for it.
Bringing it backward.